Hi everybody, thank you for joining me and welcome back to my channel. The last video we did was a significantly more angry one, but today there's been a lot of riot talk. There's been a lot of riot talk and I want to talk about riots today. I want to talk about ideologies and the different ideologies that go into riots, because there are a lot of people coming out of the woodwork to tell me that I don't know what a riot is. And I thought, okay, maybe I don't know what a riot is, so I thought I would look over some old uni material to look into the different ideologies that go into riots. And I think it's really, really important to look into this material and understand the different ideas that go into riots. For this, we're going to be looking into a uni book, like it's literally a uni book, Understanding Social Lives. It's edited by John Clark and Kath Woodward. Partially, I'll be quoting directly from this. I'll be talking a little bit. I think that all of us and myself need a refresher on what riots are and the ideologies that go into them. And I think it could be really, really interesting to just do a little dive into the ideas that exist within rioting. So in terms of political ideology, ideologies are much messier than theories and incorporate slogans, cultural symbols, and forms of propaganda. And being ideological may include a discussion in a bar, an argument in a newspaper column, or a piece of artwork. They do, however, provide the link between individuals, parties, and movements, and public opinion. Ideologies often draw on intellectuals, writers, and artists, and others who produce ideas and help disseminate them. They can help to resist change and preserve the existing order of things, for example, by promoting particular moral beliefs or making a call to national unity. It follows that ideologies have a broader function as explanatory frameworks in helping to make sense of society. So the two ideologies that we're going to be looking at in terms of rioting are radicalism, which argues that many riots have played an important part in delivering social change from below, and conservatism, which believes that gradual change and modification from above is the key to social cohesion and maintaining social order. So both of these concepts are ideologies. They are opposing ideologies, and I want to look at both of them and also take a look at the different factors in play in the current situation in the Americas and around the world right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that a lot of people get stuck on either side, and I think that sometimes meeting in the middle is not the worst thing in the world. But also I would like to clarify that just because some things are factual does not mean that I endorse them. I think a lot of people were like, well, why are you standing by people who are smashing up shops and, you know, giving them an excuse? I wasn't. I was saying that thieves will take advantage of a tragedy, which they are doing, and sometimes you need to look at the other factors that cause things like violence. The reaction of the US government to these protests that started out peacefully is extremely violent and extremely escalatory. Like, they've been escalating the violence, and I think that that needs to be taken into account, and it's not being taken into account when looking at the people who are strictly arguing from the point of businesses. Look at these businesses. Look at all the damage the rioters or protesters are doing. It is important to look at cause and effect. It is important to look at both sides, and it is important to be able to understand the factors that go into things like this. So that's why I'm doing this. I do not claim to be an authority on this. I am merely someone who wants to learn and share information, and I hope that that can be understood. I think that devolving into tribalism and side-taking and ideological, extremes is a bad idea. And I think that sometimes you need to understand where things start and how things go into other things. So we're going to start with radicalism and observing what radicalism is and how it's talked about. So according to Rude, the French riots were essentially social and political protests from below against tyranny including the legitimate actions of impoverished classes against social and economic injustice. These radical ideas attracted a large following and helped to mobilize the actions of many, aided by the medium of political pamphlets that were privately printed in order to escape censorship by the monarchy. Notably, the rights of man, reflected in the slogan Liberté, Égalité et Fraternité, liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In fact, the intellectual origins of the French Revolution are normally traced to the French Enlightenment of ideas, of reason, progress, and reform. The role of intellectuals such as Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot was crucial in setting out and disseminating many of the ideas that were subsequently adopted by revolutionaries. The ideas that go into radicalism would include popular sovereignty, so the principle that government is based on and sustained by the consent of the people, which in the simplest terms can be defined as government by the people. And this is what a lot of riots and revolutions start with. If you look at a lot of riots, it's people demanding that the government change based on the wants of the people. Also, the second organizing concept of radicalism is universal rights. So a set of rights that people acquire by virtue of their humanity, which again is, you know, human rights and universal rights are used pretty interchangeably. The rights of man, by asserting equal status for all, required accountability for those in power to the people and mechanisms which later became the basis of representative democracy, which means a form of indirect democracy in which adult citizens elect representatives to rule on their behalf, for ensuring that individual freedoms were guaranteed. The actions of the rioters on the streets of Paris and elsewhere were those of the people asserting their demand for political rights. The third organizing concept for radicalism is the progress of something, is the idea of progress, or meliorism. I don't know how that's pronounced, meliorism, whereby social change, including human emancipation and the extension of rights and freedom, is seen to be progressive and the outcome of developments in science, technology, and the spreading of knowledge. A lot of constitutions that came out of revolutions, for example, the American Revolution and the French Revolution, demand for the dismantling of ancien régime, or the old ways, and a new legal system, new calendar, weights, and measures. And these came as a result of radical movements. These are the three concepts that make up the ideology of radicalism, and the idea that people can change the government. Change can come from below. And obviously there is a lot of inflammation, there is a lot of anger, there's a lot of rage, and this is the idea behind radicalism, is all carried by these three concepts that form the ideology. Looking into conservatism, conservatism takes the opposing idea that change has to happen slowly from top to bottom rather than from the bottom to the top. So Edmund Burke, who wrote about the French Revolution, he argued that the French Revolution was not driven by a genuine desire for reform, but was motivated by self-interest and disruptive elements. I think that we see a lot of talk like this today. I should refrain from giving my opinion until the end, so I will. For Burke, the rights of man, which we mentioned before, was an abstract concept, the result of utopian and dogmatic thinking, driven by the belief that society could be constructed anew on the basis of ideas and theories. In the place of rights of man, Burke maintained that social inequalities and hierarchies were indicative of an imperfect system which had evolved over time and could not be remedied by a constitution embodying universal rights. A modification of the existing political system that resulted in constitutional monarchy, a system of government in which the hereditary head of state is constrained by the constitution. He was a supporter of the Glorious Revolution of 1688 in Britain, which was a modification of the existing political system that resulted in constitutional monarchy. He therefore believed that stability and social order were best maintained by a natural hierarchy. Its second organizing concept for conservatism is the focus that a narrower or more limited view of politics than the one held by radicals. Conservatives are pessimistic over human nature and what can be achieved by plans, blueprints, or radical programs and reforms, preferring piecemeal changes and checks and balances guided from above. The actions of the French revolutionaries and other 18th century radicals amounted to a crusade and an imposition of untested ideas, which led Burke specifically to reject the idea of popular sovereignty as the basis of new political system. The values of political leadership needed to be learnt, and social and political change needed to be gradual and consistent with existing structures. Burke therefore rejected the idea that a new kind of society could be delivered by popular protest from below without ending in violence, destruction, and instability. The third organizing concept of conservatism was a preference for wisdom rather than reason as the basis of political change. It was dangerous, according to Burke, to believe that reason and enlightenment could direct the actions of individuals in the creation of new civilization. He, and later conservatives, believed that it was wisdom, not reason, which held the key to social order. Wisdom being based on experience and knowledge that had been transferred across generations and consolidated in the institutions and customs of the society. The instability of social order depended on a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are to be born. Those that had taken part in the riots promised a revolution in sentiments, manners, and moral opinions. In other words, a rejection of dominant values accumulated over the years around which social order was organized. Successive generations of natural protectors and guardians will be cast into the mire and trodden down under the hooves of a swinish multitude. Now, if we look at these two different ideas, we look at radicalism and we look at conservatism, these two are ideologies which, if I may reiterate, they can either create change or they can help to resist change. It's a very interesting push and pull idea, and both of them are appealing to different demographics. People who want change from the bottom often that is the only way they can change things, whereas people who want change that is piecemeal and slow and want to preserve traditions and hierarchies and things like that, they tend to be people at the top who want to hold the positions that they currently hold. If you ask me where I fall in terms of ideology, I try not to align myself to different labels. But if you're going to ask me who I think makes a better case, I think that radicalism historically makes a better case. In terms of riots that had happened previously, revolutions that have happened previously, because they make a lot of good points. The three, grounding ideas within radicalism include popular sovereignty, which I would use almost interchangeably with democracy, the principle that government is based on and sustained by the consent of the people. Universal rights, as a humanist, universal rights, and the idea of progress, that we, disband things that are no longer working and we change them through means of enlightenment, getting rid of things that just don't work. Whereas with conservatism, it is to me, it sounds a very patronizing idea that the mob cannot change the system, and they should not, because they will destroy our traditions and destroy the old ways, ancient regime. And they seem to value a constitutional monarchy, which is based on a hereditary system, a system that is constrained by an old constitution and is hereditary, and they value more piecemeal methods of change, which can be frustrating and very, very slow. And I understand the benefit of that. That's one of the things that I actually like about conservatism, that they prefer to use tested methods of change rather than just changing everything at once. I think changing everything at once can be a bad idea because it is untested and no one knows how it's going to end. But the piecemeal change, the small change, and having pessimism about human nature can be extremely frustrating for masses who are already suffering. The last and final thing was the preference for wisdom over reason. which I do not necessarily agree with. The idea that leaders have a wisdom that is passed down to them through the ages that they are carrying out does not necessarily mean that they are doing the right thing. Wisdom can be right or can be wrong. There are, you know, loads and loads of monarchs to take example from. There are loads of different leaders to take example from, that their wisdom to lead and the things that have been passed down to them don't necessarily mean that they are right and correct. Whereas with reason, with the French Revolution, with the American Revolution, with a lot of revolutions throughout history, you see a lot of change. If we were to give an example of a revolution that perhaps I wouldn't think was a positive revolution, would maybe be the English Revolution, where King Charles I was beheaded and Oliver Cromwell took over and then made an entire Puritan state. Don't necessarily agree with that revolution. Think that revolution was probably a terrible idea because the monarchy was reinstated as soon as Oliver Cromwell died and his son took over. I believe his name was Richard Cromwell. And his son was not a very good leader because they seemed to stick to the same hereditary kind of idea that because Oliver Cromwell set up a republic, suddenly his son was going to take over after him. And then following that, another, war ensued and the monarchy was reinstated with Charles II. But revolutions that I do see have a more positive outcome would have been something like the French Revolution, where people rose up because they were starving, and the French monarchy was gorging themselves on lavish foods while their people were starving. Other revolutions that come to mind would have been like the Russian uprisings that took out the Tsar family. Following that, communism ensued. Not a great thing, not a good thing. Don't support it. I think that when we look at revolutions and we look at the ideas that go behind them, it's very, very important to look at what a movement is grounded in and what their aims are. And with the Black Lives Matter movement, I understand what the movement is grounded in. The ground of the Black Lives Matter movement is that Black lives should mean as much as any other life. And at the moment, it does seem that there are a lot of racially motivated offences, abuses and killings happening by an oppressive system, and that is a system that needs to change. I've seen a lot of arguments of police also kill white people. That does not change the message. The message is still that people in power, people who have guns in their hands, people who are sanctioned to protecting people, are killing people under their protection and using their power in an abusive manner, and it still needs to change. That is something that we can see, and I think that that is something that the movement is trying to gain, even though it appears as though a lot of other people and a lot of other movements are digging their claws into the Black Lives Matter movement to, skew or misdirect or, change the movement in a more violent and a more, disorderly way. I hope that this video has been in any way informative, and I hope that I've been as balanced as possible. I've, stated at the end of this video that I definitely do have a bias towards radicalism in terms of riots and revolution historically anyway, because I do believe in people fighting back against an oppressive system. I do not believe in waiting for change, especially for those in power, when a lot of people do not have trust with governments that exist now and previously. If we look at feudal systems, if we look at, later democratic systems, if we look at authoritarian systems, people have the right to fight against oppressive systems, and I do believe in that. I do believe in change from below rather than change from above in a piecemeal, don't worry, you'll get, we'll fix things in 100 years system. I don't like that idea very much, even though I do understand its benefit. So I hope that I've made that clear for those of you who are watching this, but I have tried to present this in as objective a manner as possible, and I hope that this makes you understand the riot in a bit more context, with a bit more education. I'm terrible at presenting these kinds of things. It's a wonder to me that I am an educator, but you know what, I normally educate in English and English literature, and I can usually just talk about anything and everything. I wanted to sit here today and do this because I thought it was important for me to do so, because it seems like a lot of people are taking this issue in a very, very contentious and extreme way, and we need to refrain from doing that. We need to focus on what the movement is about, and we need to not be blinkered by detractors and people who are trying to skew the message. The message is systemic oppression needs to change. That is what needs to change. And I hope that that can be carried forward, and we do have a positive outcome from these protests and from this movement. There was a protest today going on in Trafalgar Square, if I'm not mistaken. I could not make it out today, but there will be another protest on Saturday that I would like to attend, and hopefully I will have a few others joining me. I will not be filming it. I don't think it's a good idea to film it. I'm just waiting for some masks, some gloves to come in, and I'm making my signs. And I really do believe in this movement. I really do believe that in the US and across a lot of countries who claim to be progressive, there is a level of change that needs to be undertaken, and I hope that that change is undertaken. And I hope that a lot of people will not be distracted by the people who are creating more chaos and more conflict on either side. It does not matter. Thank you anyway, and I'll see you in the next video.